Hey folks, this is Lucid. We're going to be doing a tier list for the early age. I had already recorded this, so if you're seeing it pop up again, I'm re-recording it. Loggy went and made a bunch of, or he basically exported these beautiful flags for me to put back in here, so it's not the janky looking thing it was before that somebody else did. Anyway, so we have a much better looking tier list, and also the audio was messed up in the original. I had only been doing, I think, or it was only coming out in one ear. So, anyway. I don't have it pulled up in front of me what my original rankings were, so it's possible I do it a little differently. But before we get into the actual rankings of the nations, I want to talk a little bit about philosophy of this, like what it means to kind of do a tier list for Dominions 5. And how I'm thinking about it, because you and I are probably not going to agree on everything. But if we did, there would be no point for you to watch the video anyway. So let's talk about it. First off, Dominions is a very complicated game. It has more factions in it than probably any other strategy game. And the factions in it can be played in very different ways. You can design your pretenders differently, which can certainly dramatically alter how you play the nation. And it can drastically change timings and stuff you have. The other thing is how you play in the game itself, whether you turtle, whether you're aggressive, that can all kind of be done dramatically different for every nation. So because Dominions is this big, complicated game that has so many different ways it can be played, it's this huge space of, like, if you imagine all the different ways the game could be played and how we explore that with the number of players we have hardly at all explored any of that space. Because, you know, the community, I think the multiplayer community is probably like 2,000 or 3,000 players. And, you know, most people are probably in, like, on average, it's probably like 1 or 2 games, because, you know, some people are in a lot more, but, and the games take a really long time to play out, the multiplayer, like the big ones. So yeah, you know, it takes a really long time to figure stuff out. Now, that said, you can still look at nations. We can, you know, if you have a good understanding of the game mechanics, you can figure out how you think certain things will work, or things you've learned and playing other nations. You can figure out, okay, well, this will also work in this other nation I haven't really played much of. So there's a lot of theory crafting. There's a lot of stuff you can figure out. But in essence, when we get down to it, it is a game where the meta is not very fully explored. It is a game where, which is cool, because it means you can do things that people haven't done before. Like, you don't have to just copy some build that somebody did, and if you're not doing it, people are like, oh, you're dumb. You know, like, people don't actually really know how to play all the nations to their optimum, I think, in any stretch. And yeah, and the other thing is, you know, each game's different, because you're going to have different nations in the game. So it's, you know, what a nation that may be good in certain matchups may be bad in others. So assessing, you know, if we want to talk about, like, is there an objective tier list? Oh, God. I mean, I'm going to be so wrong in whatever I put for the tier list. Because the meta, as it is for the community, is imperfect. We don't have enough players to explore it efficiently to have a good understanding of what the meta is. And if you look at any good strategy game, you know, like StarCraft or something, like, where it's really competitive and there's a lot of people playing it, you know, the meta can change dramatically. And it will settle after a while, and then they'll do a patch or something to mix it back up, because people like figuring out what the meta is. I do not think we have the meta anywhere close to being understood for Dominions. Now, that said, there's things that are probably like, you can definitely do dumb stuff that doesn't work. You know, or you can do stuff that will work some of the time, and some of the times it works really well. So, on, you know, big meta, not fully explored, which means whatever I'm going to do for a tier list, like, the meta itself doesn't know, you know, like, the community, the collective experience, like, nobody knows what the right ranking is of these. And then on top of that, I am imperceptibly perceiving the meta, right? So the meta, not only is the meta wrong or, like, incomplete, I can't see it completely, because I've only played however many games I've played and talked to however many people I've talked to. And then, you know, so like not only have I not seen everything, but then on top of that, you know, like I have my own biases and opinions and things that like I like. So that's going to further kind of alter what I think. But that's cool, you know. Anyway, without further ado, we'll get into the actual kind of meat and potatoes here. We've got 5 tier rankings. S, A, B, C, D. S is going to be nations that have a kind of overwhelming advantage, which they can push to kind of run away with the game. And they don't have any kind of obvious or critical weaknesses. That's kind of the thing for S tier. A tier, usually you're going to have an overwhelming advantage, but you're usually also going to have a corresponding weakness which can be exploited. Or you can just be all around super solid for A. B tier is going to be, you know, either major overwhelming advantages with some overwhelming weaknesses, or like strong weaknesses, or, you know, just a pretty solid nation. And then C tier, you probably have some cool stuff you can do. And maybe you have some really cool stuff you can do, but you've probably also got some major weaknesses if you're a C tier nation. And then D tier, it's probably going to be pretty tricky for you to win a game. In my current understanding of this nation, if I'm putting it here, you probably either have to figure out something about the nation that certainly I or somebody else hasn't figured out, or you have to really just outplay people. Which, by the way, I think, you know, like if I were to jump into a new player game and nobody knew who I was, so they wouldn't like gang up on me, I could pick any of the D tier nations and probably win it. You know, if it's like new players, they're like, you know. But anyway, that's that. So anyway, let's get started. We're going to go put these in order. Abysia happens to be the first one. And Abysia, I think, is an A tier nation. It's a little bit between A and B. And this is going to probably be pretty different from what other people say. Abysia, though, they have really good sacreds. Burning ones are super duper good. They don't have a ton of blood access, but you can't honestly do a ton of blood hunting in early age. They can do enough blood hunting out of their capital and stuff to be a blood power. And they have fire, which can be pretty good. They also have, there's some other kind of gimmicky cool things. I'm not going to do a full guide on Abysia or any of these nations as we put them up, but just trust me when I say there's a bunch of kind of cool gimmicky stuff you can do with Abysia. And yeah, it's super good. That said, and this is a good time to also bring it up, is a new, like a, you know, somebody, their first or second multiplayer game, is Abysia going to be, you know, a wild beast out of control in their hands? Probably not. I didn't think Abysia was that strong until I saw it get played in a very strong way. And it surprised the shit out of me. And I was like, holy shit, that is the way to play Abysia. And so anyway, if you don't play the nation, we're not ranking these for like, you know, some average build or something like how the nation would play. This is, if you figure out, like, if you play the nation kind of as best as it can be played, what I think it is, as I currently understand it. And if you play Abysia the best way it can be played, you know, it is like a racing motorcycle. You know, it's fast. I mean, or maybe not fast. It's still a slow map, but it's good. Next up, we have Agartha. Ooh, Agartha, probably a B tier. They have a lot of flexibility in pretender design, because you have a lot of recruit anywhere sacreds. They have really good summons, and yeah, they're also kind of a rush target. So depending on what you get, you know, so like if you can definitely have greedy Agartha builds, and then you can have, I mean, there's all sorts of ways to build Agartha, but the thing is they have some really cool, interesting stuff they can do. And they can highly customize their sacreds for whatever task you need of them. And Great Alms are pretty good units. So they're pretty damn good. It's a pretty good nation. You know, that said, they have some major weaknesses, like cold-blooded, so they're going to have a hard time pushing into cold. In the early age, I feel like Illwinter comes up every game. And if you have Illwinter come up while you're playing Agartha, it's going to be a lot harder after that. But yeah, anyway, that's Agartha. Next up, we have Arco. And Arco, I think, is also an A-tier nation. These guys are actually kind of between A and S. The Wind Riders are probably... So the Wind Riders are these, like, flying Sacred Cav units. And they crush expansion because they've got so much strategic mobility, like they can move a really long distance on the map. And they're really efficient expanders. And the combination of those two means that by the time year one rolls around, like in test games and stuff, it is not hard to get 40 provinces. I mean, they expand like crazy. Now, in a multiplayer game, you're not going to have that much, quote unquote, room to expand in most maps. But you can just expand into other players, and they can be very aggressive in the early game. And they're, it's a little bit like flying Nazca, where you just have this, or fighting Nazca, where you just have all this flying stuff coming at you. They are super solid. That said, they do kind of have weaknesses, though. Like, the horses oftentimes aren't super duper killy, and if you trap enough of the horsing raiding parties and stuff when you first fight them, you can, kind of crush them. And they're cap only, so it's not, every time you kill horses, they're not super easy to replace. But anyway, they've got really good mages, too. It's a super solid nation. Next up is Agartha. Agartha is probably like C to B tier. They have, like, their cap-only mages are super good. They're, like, some of the better super combatants in early age. They also have really good scales troops that, they're just super solid. They've got built-in fire and cold resistance. They've got 2 attacks. One of them's magical. They're big, beefy boys. They're pretty solid. They're probably the best of the early age underwater nations, in my humble estimation. Next up, we have Berytos. Berytos is kind of interesting. It's a nation that kind of, you could say it's an A nation, but I think it has enough weaknesses that kind of make it not really an A nation. Like, it's not going to expand anything crazy like Arco, and honestly, it's not even going to expand as good as Berytos. I mean, as Abysia. They're kind of relying on human expansion. They're going to kind of be getting by. One of the kind of anti-synergies they have... So let's talk about the good stuff they have real quick. They've got good blood magic. They've got really good mages they can get. So they've got good mages. They've got blood magic they can do, which will later game kind of get them into some of the really cool summons. They can get Melkorts and stuff later. So you're like, oh man, that sounds really awesome. The problem is their sacred they recruit out of their capital isn't really that great. And it's, obviously not recruit anywhere. So you kind of... It's like, what do you get on your bless? You go too hard into your bless, and it can be pretty tough to expand. So, what do you do there? I don't know if there's an obvious answer. There's probably some really good Berytos, but it's like a B is not bad, right? Like, if you were a player that's played, 10 games of Agartha or 10 games of Berytos, and you're a good player, like, you'll be crushing people by game 9 and 10. Like, these are... B tier is not like, oh, it's a B tier nation, it's not very good. No, like, B tier, you can crush people if you know what you're doing with them. Like, they have major strengths which you can use, and you can use them to crush people. But the thing is, a lot of times there's major issues you have to work around. And I think Berytos definitely fits in that camp. Like, there's some major issues you have to work around. Like, you kind of want to do a really badass bless for your Seir and your Melkorts. But you can also play scales, like Melkorts don't need a bless. So you could do scales Berytos with maybe a tiny bless. And that could probably be pretty good. Anyway. So, I mean, there's a chance they're an A tier, but I think they're probably more a B tier. I've also never seen them win a game. And I've seen them played pretty well. I guess I had a Berytos as my partner a long time ago in a Disciples game, and we won. But... and he did actually carry me a little bit, as my partners in Disciples games tend to do. Okay, so Caelum is up next. Caelum, I think, is a B tier also. What is the hallmark of a B tier? They've got some really cool stuff they can do, but they also have some disadvantages, like some problems. Caelum has a lot of cool stuff they can do. They've got flying troops, they've got magic weapons, they have Eagle Kings. I love Eagle Kings. They have lots of cool stuff, but they also kind of have some weaknesses. Like, they're not super killy. Their scales, so they take a little bit of a while to get going. Caelum has some issues. But God, do I love Caelum. They're so good. They're one of the early age nations I'd really love to play in a multiplayer game. They're like near the top of my list. I've come up with builds with them and everything. You kind of, there's like a pipeline for getting ready for a new game. You like have the ones you're interested in, and then you get interested enough you start coming up with builds, and then you're like, okay, we're gonna pull the trigger and you play them. Okay, next up we have Satis. Early age Satis, probably A or B tier. I'm gonna go ahead and put them at B tier, but I think these guys are right on the edge. They have really good mages. Sauramancers are really good. Reborn are good. Their troops are super solid. Elite warriors, very good. I like elite warriors a lot. And the nice thing about Elite Warriors 2 in the early age is things aren't that armored, so those 2 attacks, they're going to really tear through a lot of stuff. Like, elves and stuff, they're going to be running at you like, oh, we're elves, we don't give a shit, like, about normal troops. And you're like, yeah, but you give a shit about Elite Warriors. Because elves get wrecked by Elite Warriors, let me just tell you. You can kit an elf thug to survive them, but I mean, it's going to take a fair amount of gear. I think. I mean, maybe some of the Helheim elves could chew through them long enough. Anyway, next up we have Ermor. Ooh, Ermor, probably also a B tier. One of the few times I've gotten... So Ermor, in the early age, they've got Sacred Cav, they've got a lot of the Roman troops. So they have actually a very solid troop lineup for the early age, like very good base scales troops. And their Cav is pretty good. It's not worth having a huge bless, but, you know, they certainly do appreciate whatever you're going to get for them. They have really good communion mages that can do fire and astral magic, and they're good. They're good mages. The augurs are good. They also have access to death and air, which are really good to throw into a communion. They're a very solid nation. So there's that. They also have gladiators they can get. One of the few times I've ever been just completely walked at and knocked out of a game was due to, I was Pangaea and I was fighting, I think I actually even picked the war. I was like, oh, Ermor's not very good. I'll kill them as Pangaea. Ermor just mopped the floor with me. I mean, it was embarrassing. I got wrecked. And yeah, they killed all my stuff attacking them. Then they walked over to my cap and they took my cap and I was like, oh, I guess I'm out of this game. So yeah, that's what happened with Ermor. Ermor's a solid nation, guys. It's possible it's even like an A tier and I don't fully understand it. You know, like all it takes is somebody to figure out, like, you know, like when to build troops, what times to do wars, and if you get that really figured out for a nation, it could be like you're consistently like stomping people. In Ermor, I think they had, God, having gladiators too, it's a really big deal. It means you do not want to rush a nation with gladiators, with a lot of different troops. Next up we have Fomoria. I think Fomoria is probably an S tier nation. They have overwhelming advantages. Like, they have super combatants, they have thugs, like budget thugs. They have really good mage core. The Fomorian druids basically are just huge workhorses. You know, they research okay, they're kind of expensive. They're not great research investment, but God, when you have to fight and you pull in those Fomorian druids and they're doing Thunderstrike in your storm, oh boy do they hurt. I mean, they just get things done. They can also all cloud trapeze, so you're like insanely mobile. So anyway, you can do just enormous alpha strikes with Fomoria. And then their Fomorian kings are super combatants, and they play as such. So you can just wipe out entire unprepared armies with Fomorian kings. Versus the AI, you can just crush stuff. Versus players, you know, a good player is going to be able to kill Fomorian kings, and is going to be careful about exposing units to them. But still, the other thing, they have really good like Death Air crosspath, which if you're watching my Lanka game, it's a very good crosspath. You know, they also have Earth Magic, which is something that Lanka doesn't have. So yeah, it's a super solid nation. Yeah, I totally dig Fomorian Kings. I mean, Fomoria. They also have Dance of the Morgans, one of the best spells in the game. And that comboed with Wailing Winds is a little bit broken. So, next up, we have Helheim. Helheim is kind of interesting. They are probably between like A and B tier. They're probably a B tier. I've never seen Helheim do super duper well. They've got, yeah, they're elves. You know, what can you say? They're elves. They play like a lot of the elves in the other eras. They have sacred horses. They run around. They're immune to normal troops. So if you don't know how to kill elves, like it's in a new player game or something, elves are completely overpowered. In an experienced player game, you know, elves are still pretty good. They're still freaking annoying. But the main thing when you're killing elves is you have to use elf killing tools to kill elves. You don't try to kill elves with things that do horribly against elves, which means you have to use mages. Like, you don't try to kill, or you have to use some specialized sacred. You don't really kill elves with normal troops. The other thing you can kind of kill elves with is archers, but anyway. That said, you know, they've got Death Air again, same thing as Fomoria. They can do cloud trapezing stuff, but more expensively than Fomoria. They're pretty good. I mean, they're pretty damn good. Yeah, Fomoria can also go underwater too. That's another thing. You know, could they be in A tier? Yeah, maybe. They're definitely solid. Like, everything in B tier can do really cool stuff. So yeah, I mean, like all elves, you have to be a little bit worried about them running away with the game, because a few bad players, like people who don't know how to deal with elves, and then the elves figure that out and attack them, like everybody else on the map's in a lot of trouble. Next up, we have Hinnom. Hinnom, I think, is an A tier nation. They have some major weaknesses, like the fact that their commanders eat all of your population in an era where there's not much population to start with. So that's a bit of a problem. But they have really good scales troops, like super good. Probably some of the best in the era. They're expensive. They struggle a little bit with siege chaff. They've got excellent mage lineup, some of the best path diversity in the early age. They've got super combatants, which are always nice to have in a pinch, and they've got really good summons. The problem is like, in some ways they often look better on paper than they do in actual game, and a lot of that has to do with, you know, they have really good stuff, but it's also kind of expensive. Like, it's priced appropriately. But I do feel, yeah, I've played Hinnom a few times, and I actually haven't won with them. I won with them once. I think I'm 1 for 4 or something with Hinnom. So I've lost with Hinnom a lot. I have a lot of experience losing with Hinnom. But it's one of those things, every time I lose, I'm like, God, if I just played better, I would have done, you know, every game I walked away with Hinnom, I was like, God, I have to do better next time and not make the same mistakes. So they have a lot they can do, and figuring out the right way to play them and all, I think, is really important. And I think I probably haven't even played them right, but they definitely are a nation that has some really, really cool stuff they can do. There's an argument they maybe should be B tier, but I think, my personal opinion, especially if somebody a lot better than me comes along and plays them, spends a lot of time really digesting them, I think they're an A tier nation. Next up we have Kailasa, which I think is between B and C. On one hand, I've never seen anybody win with Kailasa yet. Not to say it hasn't been done, I'm sure it has, but I haven't seen it. Sakane, who played Kailasa in my Zabalba game, he, I think, would have won that game. But we ended up calling it a tie between him and Saramatia. Kailasa is an interesting nation because you have Recruit Anywhere Sacreds, and you can summon a lot of Sacreds. So you're going to get, you know, you have a lot of flexibility. And if you have a good understanding of who you're going to be fighting, what you're going to need, what kind of timings you're going to have, what your research is going to be, and you design your Sacreds to kind of align with that, then it's a really strong nation. That said, their Sacreds are basically naked. Right? They have like hardly any gear. They're naked, carrying usually a sword. They kick people, and they have a tiny-ass shield. So, yeah, they have major vulnerabilities, but those are things you can often work around. They have cool mages. It's a solid nation. Like, you could say it's a B nation, but the weaknesses they have in terms of, like, naked Sacreds, I think those are overwhelming enough that the overwhelming strengths they have of having other really good stats on their Sacreds, like Awe, and, you know, they have really good mages, and they get Recruit Anywhere Sacreds, unlike a lot of other nations. You know, it's like, in some ways, kind of overwhelming strength and overwhelming weakness. So it's tricky. I think this is a nation with a high skill cap. So if you're a really good player, you can pick them up and probably do pretty well with them in a multiplayer game. And, like, potentially, if you invest a ton of time and you really understand it, maybe, you know, for you, it could actually kind of become an A tier. But I haven't seen anybody turn it into an A tier nation yet. Like, you know, like when Sakane played it, he made it seem like it should be a B tier. But I don't know. We'll have to see. That's the thing, too. Like, you have a good player play a nation, And it's like, oh, it's really good. Well, a lot of times, you know, people don't want to play the same nation 10 times in a row. So they're not going to, like, get it super figured out. So that's another thing. Like, do we really know if somebody wins one game or almost wins one game, or, you know, somebody wins 2 games in a row that, like, a nation's really good? Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to know things in the world of Dominions, for sure. Next up, we have Lanka. I think Lanka is an A tier. Are they S? I don't think they're S. I think they're a little bit slow enough going where, you know, there's issues. I also was really lucky in the Lanka game to start in, like, a corner of a map, which I think helped with, like, blood hunting security and stuff. I think it's a super solid nation. But they also have weaknesses, like the weakness to fire, everything being a demon. You know, there's definitely some issues they can have. And there's definitely nations which are going to be stronger than them at other times in the game, where they might even not win a 1v1. And, you know, are they, you know. So anyway, I think it's an A tier. It's really solid. They have a lot of diversity and stuff they can do. If you attack into Lanka and Lanka gets to use their whole mage court to defend, that is a very scary thing. So I think it's a super solid nation. Even after the nerfs, I think, like, God, Dominions 4 Lanka was probably like an S tier. I think they got appropriately nerfed to being. Oh, I think I actually messed up my recording. I'm probably gonna have to merge these. Anyways, on the Lanka topic, yeah, I think they're probably in an A tier in Dom 5, which is pretty good. Pretty good. Next up, we have Machaka. Machaka, I think they're, like, between A and B tier, but I'm gonna list them as a B. They have lots of cool stuff they can do. They've got solid vanilla, you know, say scales troops. You know, their sacreds are pretty situationally useful because they have that stunning blow. They have Buddhas, which are some of the most interesting mages in the game. They're stealthy, super versatile. Machaka they have really good mages, and they have you know, good enough troops. And nobody expects Machaka. You know, people aren't like, oh, Machaka, it's going to be, like, super duper scary. Machaka can do all sorts of crazy stuff. They can also, they have lots of heretics, so you can do interesting things with heretics if you want to. But anyway, that is Machaka. Next up, we have Marverni, and Marverni is a bit of an interesting goose. On one hand, you could, yeah, I think they're probably like a B tier. There's a lot of things Marverni has going for it. They have really cheap astral mages. They have pretty good path diversity with throwing them into communions. They have basically kind of this, like, infinitely scaling boar machine they can turn on. And they have solid-ish, you know, cap-only sacreds. So yeah, I like Marverni. They kind of have some weaknesses too, like their scales troops I'm not in love with, and the boars kind of fall off in the late game once Beast Mastery comes out. That's kind of later in the game, so I don't know. I mean, they're a good nation. Like, B nations are good, but they're a little gimmicky, and yeah, I don't feel like they're like an A nation. But you can definitely snowball out of control with them. And they have, I mean, some of the cheapest astral mages in the game. The soothsayers are super solid. They're a very good nation. But I don't think they're an A tier. Next up, we have Mekone. Mekone, I think, used to be a D tier. But now I think they're a C or maybe even a B tier. You know, the thing with... I thought they were really, really bad, and then they got patched, and now they're not quite as bad. But even then, before they got patched, you know, the guy in my Lanka game, he's playing him, and he did the Great Archon build, where he basically was I think we'll call the Alchemist Chicken. And, yeah, he was doing really cool stuff with them. And it's possible if they had been buffed the entire game, he might have won it, you know, because he only got to play with them as they buffed Mekone for, like, the last half. Oh, and this may be a bit of a spoiler, but anyway. Yeah, so is Mekone good? I don't know how good they are. I don't feel comfortable putting them as a B. The changes they got in the patch are they're going to get more of the... they're basically going to get more of their big scales Gigante warriors. And they get... The Archon becomes recruit anywhere. And the thing is, one of the problems with Mekone is fire and earth, like low fire and low earth mages are really bad in the late game. But high fire and high earth are really nice in the late game. So like if you're a fire 3 mage, that's still good in the late game. And if you're a fire or an earth 3 mage, that's good in the late game. And that's kind of what Archons will be. They also have an air variety, and adding like Cloud Trapezing Archons to the mix of things Mekone can do. Super good. So yeah, I think Mekone may be a B nation. I think we just have to see it played more. I feel like, you know, like these are not bad nations. Like you look at these, and I'm not like saying they're bad, but so far they're just the worst I've ranked so far. They have usually some kind of major weakness or like slowness that anyways keeping them down here. But you know, it's totally possible Mekone, like I could totally see somebody winning a game with Mekone now. I wouldn't be like, oh my god, you won a game as Mekone. They are a solid nation now. If you're a D, you're not a solid nation though. Next up is Mictlan. I think Mictlan is the other S tier nation of the early age. They're just super good. The Jaguar. What's different about Mictlan in the early age? Well, the troops that you have to expand into are a lot easier in the early age. It's a little hard expanding in like late age with Mictlan because you still have the same troops and like everybody else has gotten big fucking armor and stuff. So expanding in the late age and stuff is pretty tough as Mictlan. You have to have some really specific kind of... Even if you have a Helpless, it's tricky. In the early age, you can get by a lot better. The problems in the early age with Mictlan a little bit are that there's not a ton of population. So that part's a little tricky. Like, how do you get a big roaring blood economy going? But Mictlan has a lot going for it. They have really good mages. Their sacreds are really good. They can get a lot of them because they're recruit anywhere. And on top of that, they are going to have like blood summons coming online at some point too. So I dig Mictlan. They're going to have weaknesses though, because you're typically going to want to take some kind of Hellbless on them, which means you're not going to have money. You're also going to be blood hunting. So your research is normally going to be kind of garbage on them. Which is kind of going to be a similar problem to like what Lanka has. But you're going to be probably wanting to take a more, even stronger Hellbless than you would have on Lanka with Mictlan. Like you usually want to go like all in on a Hellbless with Mictlan. Which means potentially even less money. But yeah, I dig Mictlan. I think they are probably one of the best. Like they scale so hard. They scale really hard. Next up, we have Niefelheim. And I think Niefelheim's an A tier nation. On one hand, you can get like a regeneration kind of bless for Niefelheim and expand with Niefel Giants. And they're just going to crush everything. And it's kind of, it's one of, I think it might have even been the first nation I played Dominions with. Like I got Dominions, I was like, oh, let's be the Frost Giants. And they're fun. Like single player, you can just go stomping the AI with the regen Giants. It's a fun thing to do. But that said, some of the obvious things that they can do, which anybody can do when they first get on, those are not the only things Niefelheim can do. Niefelheim has Niefel Jarls, which can be super combatants and like hard super combatants, like very hard to kill super combatants. They have Scrotty, which are like high-end thugs to the point they might even be super combatants, though they do have some weaknesses. They have the Gaijas are amazing; they're phenomenal. Yeah, I mean, it's a super solid nation, and they have a lot of, they can do communions, like Sabbath communions. They have a ton of stuff that they can do. I think Niefelheim is super duper good. But you know, they don't have the scalability, or like they don't have the mobility that Fomoria does, and they don't have the scalability that Mictlan does, but they're super duper solid. So A tier. Oceania, the Pangaea of the ocean. They're kind of like a worse Pangaea, except they're in the ocean. So unless there's another ocean nation, you can't really mess with them. That said, like, it's kind of weird to put Pangaea's D when Oceania is probably, like, or Pangaea is much higher. But they're worse in some important ways. Like, not only are their units a bit, like, significantly worse, they're still not bad, but they're significantly worse. And, you know, like, they get the sirens, which can seduce you on the only on the coastline, and then they bring you, instead of you getting to steal the unit, if the seduction works, instead of having an assassin battle, you drown in the ocean, like, unless you're amphibious. So, like, you know, it's, and then they've kind of, so it's kind of like Pangaea without a lot of the really cool stuff Pangaea can do. And instead, you kind of just get stuck with the Pangaea limited magic diversity. That's a little bit how I feel about Oceania. If you study them hard, you might be able to figure out some cool stuff to do with them. And maybe you can make it work. I have to really start using my... Like, I can totally see a game where Atlantis wins, where Kailasa wins, where Mekone wins. Like, I can visualize how that happens in my head. My imagination is not quite strong enough to figure out how that would happen with Oceania. Do I think it's probably possible? Yes, but I'm just not that imaginative right now. Next up, we have Pangaea. Pangaea, they are probably right between A and B. The Swarm nerf hurt them a lot. Swarm used to be kind of way stronger because the bugs used to do armor negating damage. Now they do armor negating poison damage, which is not nearly as good. That hurt the Dryads a bit. And, you know, White Centaur are good, but I don't know. I'm really on the fence whether they're A or B. I can't even remember what I put them in the first video. I probably put them as A. And I think they probably are an A. They have some kind of cool things they can do with Mineads. You know, the Pans are a really good recruit anywhere mage. They get a trickle of blood income. They have Dryads, so you kind of don't want to attack them. Yeah, they're a good nation. They're good. They're really good. That said, they have major weaknesses, too, that make up for that. Like, Dryads are oppressive. They're absolutely oppressive. But, you know, they got nerfed with Swarm. And Pangaea has pretty bad magic access. Like, they have some blood, they have a tiny bit of water, and they have nature and a tiny bit of earth. So, it's like, it's not great. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe they also have one more path or something. Next up, we have Pelagia. Pelagia is going to go in the D tier. They have a hard time getting out of the water, as Pelagia tends to do. They have some troops that can, you know, but then you're usually kind of walking on land with a motley crew. If you're the only water nation and you can find pretty good targets, you can probably make it out. I think it would be pretty hard to win a solo game against good players playing as Pelagia. You know, I think Perun had a video where he played them against, where it's a Disciples game, and the fact that they have Pearl Farmers, the value of that trait amplifies in a Disciples game, right? Because you can Pearl Farm for everybody, and so I think they controlled some important globals and then won the game. But single player, I mean, just free-for-all playing Pelagia, I don't know. D tier. EA Relay. I think the EA Relay probably could be down here. Honestly, though, I think they're... And I think I probably put them down here in the last video. I think they probably are up here. The Aboleths and stuff not being able to go out of the ocean is a big problem. But they do have slave mages, and slave mages are really good, and they can go out of the water. And slave mages, you can do a lot of stuff with slave mages. And then they don't have as good a troops that can leave the water as, like, Middle Age. Like, they don't have Meteorite Guard. I think they have Slave Guardians or something that, anyway, they're solid enough to go out of the water and not be, you know, complete wimps. And then, of course, they can do Lobo Guard and stuff. But, so I think they're probably, like, a C tier. And And then Aboleths can do some kind of cool things with Amulets of the Fish and stuff. So, it's interesting. I could see them winning a game. But I think they're right on the edge of kind of like C and D. Like, I think for them to win a game, the opponent probably also has to misplay some. But I could be wrong. Maybe it would be fun to really invest in trying to figure, trying to make early age relay work. Next up, we have Rus. Rus is interesting. They have the Chud Skin Shifters, which are basically sacreds that turn into a big angry bear, and they go berserk, and they hit really hard. They're cap only, though. Their mages tend to be kind of like a little overpriced. So they have really good sacreds, so they could be pretty scary in a war. But it's a little kind of one-dimensional, like you come up with something to kill the sacreds, and then what are they going to do? And then, the mages, overpriced kind of for what you're getting, not phenomenal diversity or power or anything. If Rus won a game, would I be super surprised? No. Do I think they're like some, really scary nation you have to be cautious of? Not really. They do have sacred troops too, so I mean they have other things they can do aside from just the skin shifters, but yeah. Saramati is next. I think Saramati is an A-tier nation. I really... I had seen, I think, Nuclear Monkey play Saramati, and I was like, yeah, this guy knows what he's doing. This is a strong nation. And then I got thinking about it. I was thinking all these other things Saramati can do. And Saramati just has a lot of flexibility and stuff they can do. They have really good mages. I think it's the Inari. I can't remember all the names, but I think it's the Inari. Anyway, they have really good mages. They have the Soothsayer too, super solid. Their cap-only sacreds are pretty damn good. They're just a really good nation. They have so much stuff they can do. I totally dig Saramatia. Therodos. Between probably B and C. I think they're probably a B nation. They have Melias who can kind of thug. They have a lot of ghost production. Therodos, I think, is probably about buffing ghosts, and they can buff their ghosts pretty damn well. They also are typically going to have pretty good research for, compared to other pop kill nations. And their Dominion kills stuff pretty slowly. So, you can have your population for a good long while. I think Therodos is probably like a good solid B nation. I haven't ever really played them much. I played against some good Therodoses where I was like, holy crap, they're pretty good. Anyway. TNC is next. Early age TNC probably used to be better with... Actually, I'm not sure. I'm trying to think what got nerfed about them. I think they're probably like a B tier. The Warriors of the Five Elements are really good sacreds. You're going to be limited in how many you can get, obviously. They're cap only. They have trouble buffing large amounts of them, and they also, like archers and stuff can kind of tear them apart. They feel a little on the gimmicky side for sacreds, but they're pretty damn versatile, and because they've got the built-in resistances and stuff, but they still have some important holes where you can kind of crush them. They get a lot of summonable sacreds, so it's a strong nation. I remember there was a tournament a while ago that EA TNG won in like Dominions 3 or 4. So I think TNG is figuring out like the minimum kind of good bless for the sacreds you get, both the recruitable and the summons, and then, being able to switch between those and your Scales troops. I think it's a solid nation, though. Next up, we have TNN. TNN, I think, is a B tier, maybe an A tier. They have some of the best assassin game in the early age. Probably second best, maybe even best. The Bean Sids are just disgusting. They're absolutely nuts. I mean, it's so unbelievably disgusting. So yeah, they have a really good assassin game. They have pretty good troops. They're going to expand well. They can do They have really good thugs. They're a little gimmicky. Like, they do the assassins, they do the elfish troops, and they do the thugs. And that's kind of it, I think. That's at least all I know about. So, yeah. But they do those things really well. They do them really well. So, it's probably a solid B, maybe even an A tier. I feel like it's right on the cusp. Next up, we have Ubar. I think a lot of people think Ubar is, like, crazy good. I think when it first came out, people didn't know how to play against them. I don't think Ubar is crazy good. I think they're solid. I think that, like, Shaitans are really good. The Jinn are pretty good, you know, but they can be, like, really hard countered. And, you know, they can get into blood later, which is nice. They're definitely not an S tier in my book, because they have their weaknesses are pretty overwhelming, too. Are they an A tier? Maybe. You know, it depends too, because it's like, it's a weird nation design, because if people take the counters to them, they're actually not that good. If people don't take the counters to them, you really can use the Jinn a lot, and then you can kind of run over people. But if people take the counters, oh my gosh, it's actually kind of hard. I think, I mean, Shaitan are nice and stuff, but like, I think they're B tier, honestly. Like, they're between B and A. But I think they're closer to B than they are to A. I think they are. I do like Shaitan. But I don't think... I mean, but I also like Dryads, and I also like Bean Sids. They have some interesting stuff they can do. I'm on the fence. I'm not sure whether they're B or A. I think I'm gonna have them as B here, and I might have done it differently in the other video, but they're on the fence for me. Next up is Ulm. Ulm, I think, is a C tier nation. They've got really killy troops, so they're gonna plaster the wall in hand axes as they mulch through anything you send at them. So if you want just piles of super killy garbage, Ulm is, they're your man. And they have kind of other interesting things they can do with, like, custom National Long Dead that they get from reanimation, and, you know, they've got interesting mages that have pretty good early game buffs for the army. So, I like them. I think they have some issues scaling. They can also go stealthy, so that's something that's pretty strong in their camp. It could be they're better than I'm thinking, but I don't think they have a lot of kind of the overwhelming, or, you know, they've got, like, they don't have any overwhelming advantages, I don't think. I think they have some strong advantages, and I think that's kind of it. They have also major disadvantages of, like, not great path diversity, and not very deep in paths. They tend to have kind of shallow path mages. So I don't know. I'm not in love with their mage core. They're not bad, but I'm not, like, in love with them. I do like the killy troops, though, but I don't know. And being stealthy is nice, too. Next up, we have Uruk, which honestly, I think is, like, kind of between C and D. Like, they're on the lower end of the C scale compared to these other guys. They get some kind of cool troops. You know, they're not bad. They tend to not have hats, if I recall. And their mage core, pretty okay, but not very good. I'm not... It's nothing like... Or wait, this is and then middle-aged Uruk. I can't ever remember which one's which. Middle-aged I think that's Uruk, is the really good one. They have really strong communions. I like middle-aged a lot. Early age, not as big of a fan, I'm not going to lie. Not as big of a fan. They still do have cool stuff they can do. And they still have some pretty good summons. So this possibly isn't fair. Maybe they should be a B, but, like, I don't know. I think they're a C nation. Like, you could probably figure out how to make them work like you can a lot of the C nations, but I don't see any obvious overwhelming strength. Next up is Vanheim. Vanheim is interesting. Vanheim probably has to go up here as being an A tier nation. I think when they're in the game, either you have stuff that can kill Vanheers or you don't. And a lot of it depends. Like, if you do, like, a Thug Bless for Vanheim, they play a lot differently, because the Vanheers are no longer oppressive. But uh yeah. But if you take like a Vanheim like Blender Bless, I mean the guys are just ridiculous. I mean they are extremely oppressive. They're so killy. I mean it's ridiculous. And then they have the thugs, and then they have air and blood magic. Vanheim, I think, they're a top-notch nation. They're one of, if you get rushed by Vanhears, it's kind of one of the kind of era-defining things. Next up is we have Xibalba. I think Xibalba is also an A-tier nation. They have some critical weaknesses, though. Like, the cold thing is a critical weakness, and they're a little bit slow out of the gate. Like, Bad Expansion got nerfed really, really hard going from Dominions 4 to 5. With the changes to the recruitment point system, and then also how Flyers got nerfed in general. So yeah, Xibalba got hit really hard with the nerf bat in the beginning. So, but they have really cool stuff. They have, in my opinion, some of my favorite mages in the game. They have really good summons. They have Theft of the Sun. Xibalba has a lot of really, really, really good stuff. But they also have some pretty big weaknesses, too. So, anyway, that's Xibalba for you. And then next up, we have Yomi. And Yomi, I think, is probably a B-tier nation. They have some pretty cool stuff they can do. They've got, you know, Dione, who can super combatant. You can do super combatant expansion with them, which if you watch the Yomi series, that's what I do. You can make Oni pits and get huge amounts of free spawn. That comes with its own drawbacks of basically causing huge amounts of turmoil in your territory. There's probably other ways to play them too. They got, I forget what recruits they get, but I think they get some of the brigands and stuff. There's probably a bunch of different ways to play Yomi. I think they're at least a B tier. But they, you know, they get hard countered, like Holy Scourges and stuff wreck Dione. So that's always the thing you're worried about if you're using them as super combatants. And yeah, but I think they're solid. Like if somebody were like, I want a game as Yomi, definitely would not be surprised. I'd be like, oh, okay. How did you do it? Like which of the options available to you to win the game did you take? Anyway, so that's the tier list for early age. Let me know what you think about it. I think I have this saved. I'm going to go ahead and save this here. And I'll make it early age. Remind me if I don't. I'll put a link in the description. You can come do your own tier list. So thank you all for listening, and I will see you next time. Cheers.